I'm going to blow up the sketch onto this larger board. And it's a built board, 2x2s and some like lumber, lumber from like Home Depot or whatever. Highly gessoed. I did a little bit of sanding on it. And then the color I put was the nickel azo yellow. So the golden acrylics are the best. The nickel azo yellow is an extremely high-powered color. Yeah, I'll talk about James Gurney later. In fact, I should probably do some reviews on some of the artists I'm looking at now. But he's an illustrator more than a fine artist. But of course, he's the real deal, So he really knows his color theory, really knows his composition. Back in a time when illustration was it was all done with physical media, like actual paint and actual pen on paper and stuff like that. Whereas now you can't really paint gallery type art digitally, even though I'm sure people try and I'm sure people have some degree of success. I mean, the human spirit of ingenuity is like going to find a way to make it work no matter what, right? But anyway, but he's the kind of guy that like really knows his stuff. So you listen to him, and he was a legend, one of the 5 or 6 contemporary kind of legends when I was in art school, right? So anyway, so I figured I'd play along and try to start with a yellow underpainting. Rather than a neutral or something like that, and it was fun. It was fun to do. You can see just like on the sketch before, this was skewed. The horizon was skewed. I had to come up with a formula for it so I could sort of reconstitute the horizon, and I actually have to once or twice, right? So the horizon is at 50% here, and it's about 30% here. It was or 33, right? It's a third to a half. And seeing as this is 24, this is like 12, and this is like 8, right? 8 inches here, 12, and so I can reconstitute if I lose it. So anyway, this is going to start just like the other one did. I have a very large like triangle here. I was going to use the green gold, but that was just an example of something else. And let's see how this starts. Oh. Yeah, and so this isn't even important. These are like the same tools I used on the other one, but I end up only using like a warm gray, like the warm gray Faber-Castell brush pen for this. And I didn't even use as many on the underpainting here as I did, or on the underpainting and underdrawing. I didn't even use as many here as I did on the other work, or on the sketch. Because you just don't need it. Anyway, so I'll move through this really quick. I don't know if you want to see it. Let's see if it's any fun to watch. I mean, artists kind of like it, but even as an artist, sometimes I want to see the fast stuff. Yeah, it's like, do you really need to see that? Dude, that's the beauty of like good, thick, like emulsion on there. And like using these pens, you've got like a few minutes, you can just like wipe, wet rag, you can just wipe it off, and it's super, dude, we'll do so much sketchbook stuff. Like sketchbooks is really my fave. But then finished paintings are too. So it's like sketchbooking is more about concepts. This is really more about gallery level work that you want to end up selling. You should probably see how I use some of the triangle at least. Okay, so I love using straight edges, especially triangles, because you can get this, you can get a grip on it. And you get the proper grip, you can use a triangle very easily, very quickly. And you can see I am not getting precise with the measurements at all. Like I'm eyeballing things. I'm not measuring stuff necessarily, and I'm eyeballing angles and stuff like that, and using the triangle very, very loosely, so I can then kind of go back in freehand, and I kind of have an idea of the angle I want, but it's just so loose, right? And I want the straight, like I want a straight line, especially because I have this thing for like architecture work. I love the negative space built by architecture, but part of like what really gets me going about it is the crisp straight line. So, I'm a designer too. I mean, these days I do, user experience. I got my like full corporate, and wanted to actually get a paycheck instead of like hustling for every single dollar. But I was fine doing that, in my 20s and early 30s, and made good amount of money painting. But you have family, you want the real cheddar, right? And it's just too inconsistent with gallery work, So I sold out and went into the corporate world and all that. But I got to where I was through this track that took me through graphic design, right? So I really love typography, really love graphic design. You'll see this stuff in the sketchbook work once we start getting there. And my style is very much about integrating things that shouldn't have anything to do with one another, right? So I want typography, I want graphic design, I want hard lines and hard shapes sometimes, but I also want like very loose painterly brush strokes, right? Because all of those things are beautiful, right? And I love negative shapes. So you get these beautiful architectural negative shapes, and so you have buildings as they're being constructed, or certain kind of city skylines, and you get beautiful negative shapes, and you get, I don't know, you'll see it as we go on, but being a designer and an artist, you should be falling in love with shapes somewhere in the world, with color somewhere in the world. Like, I'm just a geek for, of course, like sunsets and stuff like that. Like, that's my favorite manifestation of color on Earth. It's like skies, right? Skies, sunsets, I mean, that's pretty easy, but it's like the cloud shapes and the colors that happen there through atmosphere. So like mountains and atmospheric perspective, I just love, right? So color wise, like that's where my brain is always I'm just looking for the next beautiful like atmospheric perspective. But also maybe like electric lights. So you have very naturalistic atmospheric effects in light, or with artificial light over it, and architectural shapes. And it's like suddenly, Shane loves that composition. Shane wants to paint that, right? So that's kind of exactly what we're doing here. I'm just laying stuff in. This is not precise. I don't care about precision. I really care way more about the angles, and you'll see that as I get this architectural shape going, and I'll show you here. This is not a beautiful drawing. There's nothing here that I would consider beautiful. You can see like I'm using like some broad hatching stuff. It's way more of like a comic book type thinking, right? What's really the issue here was this shape is a silhouette against the sky, but that same shape moves through here and turns into the positive shape, whereas this becomes dark, right? And it's light over here. So you have the same shape moving from this dark sort of windowed backdrop, and it's the same color, but out here it's a dark negative shape, and here it's a light positive shape, the same shape, right? So I just wanted to make sure that whatever I was sketching here, I'm tracking that. And that's it. That's all I was trying to track here. I don't care if it looks gorgeous because I know how I'm going to paint it, and it's going to just obliterate the drawing like real quick. Here, except essentially a type of notation that tells me what I should be paying attention to when I start laying down the actual color, right? And I'm telling you about this, and I forgot what I was talking about before. Oh yeah, like the subject matter that finds you as an artist. So you'll see like natural. You have the golden hour, right? You have like evening to sunset, and that's when the artificial lights go from like not really being there to sort of emerging out of the darkness. You still get beautiful interplay between like glass on buildings reflecting things. Like you can really still see a lot of the type of detail you'd see during the day, but it gets subdued enough where the artificial light really starts playing against it, right? So this magic hour, and this subject matter, like a lot of the reason why I chose this, and I've been geeking out on this whole area this summer. It's because it just builds beautiful shapes, like beautiful shape, beautiful color. It's a beautiful horizon. The area I'm in it's just gorgeous sunsets. Everything's it's just like right on, right? And I've been watching this build. I watched as they constructed this thing, so I have a ton of photo reference to this thing at all like times in its life of its construction on through like the last few years of it existing on Earth, and I love the silhouette. I'm not a huge fan of modern architecture until it comes to like drawing it. Like as a subject matter for drawing, it's like perfect, especially when it starts to interplay with the environment or whatever. You can just see how horrible this drawing is, and it is totally not supposed to. I should have got better. I should have paid more attention because in the end, I have to actually this part of the horizon actually creeps down a little bit, and I lost for a little while. I lost this important aspect of the sort of dynamism of this painting with the horizon being skewed, because you have this skewing of all the buildings where it's sort of like fish-eyed in, but then you skew the horizon, so you have this really interesting, super dramatic shape going on, right? And I sort of accidentally dropped this horizon a little bit or didn't emphasize it the same way, so I lost a little bit of the dynamism I had in the sketch. Right. So, and I bring it back by the end, and I think I sort of recaptured it, but like, never forget how much easier it is to capture a certain type of dynamism and movement in something small like a sketch than it is in your final, but that's okay. I mean, I had so much other shit I was worrying about in this. I'm not too worried about it, but, that's right, kitty. That is right. Anything else going on here? Yeah, so, it's just vaguely box-like, and this is vaguely rounded, and like, just cars suck. Like, unless you're really wanting to get into some super clear drafting. I love highly detailed sort of pen and ink drafts of cars. Great, love it, right? Something that's like a vector, and this is like computer lingo, right? So like a vector sketch of cars where you're like focusing on reflections and stuff like that. Love it, right? But for something that's very painterly, very fine art like, getting like the modern body designs of cars, like it's not apparent those are various that like, maybe in 50 years when people look back, it'll be interesting, but like plastic paneling and everything looks like like a shitty insect or something, it's not as cool as like, seeing like those old, like a broken down like truck or a broken down rusted out Ford, that's getting over, like that's gorgeous subject matter. These things just aren't, it's not apparent to me that these have some inherent like beauty. you know Yet I'm choosing the subject matter where they're like, I'm like on the road. When I take this reference, like I literally, like, I plot my gimbal camera, a beautiful little DJI gimbal camera, pointing out the windshield, and I can just drive around, dude. I the painting I do after that, after this painting, that's a study of this same building. I got during a storm, one of the craziest lightning storms I've seen in a while here, and we have some crazy storms over here. And come on, get out of the way, down in front. Anyway, but it's a great way to get photo reference because it's very dynamic, right? But sometimes you just get cars in there, which is great. That's fine. That's fine. But you have to find a way to make these cars beautiful or painterly, at least, when their design doesn't necessarily lend itself to whoop, the kind of beauty you might be. They don't necessarily lend themselves to the kind of beauty you might be hoping for with like rusted out, like metal bodied cars from like the 50s, right? All right, so this is the leftover palette from the sketch. Actually, is that true? I'm trying to think. I think it is true. Yeah. No, it's not true. I used that's the same color space for sure. It's the same colors. I don't know what I use that for, but it's okay. It's the same colors though, same color space. So the exact same colors I use through the sketch. I use all through this. That was the whole point. I'm using the same palette, using the same the same subject that's interesting, and doing the sketch. Anyway. So I did some other landscapes with that, I think. Anyway. So I just mix it up and start to lay it on with the palette knife. I would show you this, but at this point, my palette knifing skills aren't. I had like a new set of palette knives I'm using. Like I said, I don't know if I told you, or if I've said it here, but I told you I sold out into the corporate world. Well, I hadn't done any serious like fine art finished painting in like nearly a decade. I do a lot of sketching, really, still, just to keep the skills warm, because as an artist you can't really like just drop your skills. But when I decided to get back onto it, a lot of it was I just sort of like relearn everything, and I felt like my palette knife skills were one of those things that weren't quite set yet, right? Weren't quite up to snuff. But that's okay. I'm just trying to cover a lot of space and render some texture. And the whole point is that what the textures I'm keeping here are going to persist throughout the entire painting, right? And I'm very much trying to keep this yellow underpainting poking through if it's appropriate. Trying to go over my palette a little bit. Oh, looks like I cleaned it off. Reset it. Built some sky color. The only difference you may want to see is I'm using I keep calling it a buff. It's not really buff. I think it's like a bone white or like an unbleached titanium. I don't remember. There were a bunch of these that were on sale at a local art store which I generally am too embarrassed to say which one it was because it's a chain. But anyway, I liked it. It's one of those like artist level paints that doesn't have nearly as dense a pigment as you'd hope for, but that's actually kind of good here. I want like something way lighter bodied. You know, it's like not even medium bodied paint. So but it's not liquid either. So it's in between light and liquid. Not too pigment dense, but I really like the color and it really cuts very well with the blues, which of course I'm using ultramarine, and I think I used the phthalo turquoise here, but I also introduced a phthalo blue because I didn't want the turquoise took over a lot of the little sketches I had been doing, which is fine. I kind of wanted it to because the reference I got was tinted like that, and I loved it, but I wanted to push it a little more toward the phthalo blue and get my sort of green fix from the phthalo blue, and the turquoise comes into play a little bit, but not nearly as much. But anyway, with the phthalos, like this buff just cuts it so well. I think it's I should take a photo and like lay it here, but and then of course all the other blues just ultramarine. You know, and these are like drastically, yeah, you can see the kind of green tint coming here, and this would be a little more toward the phthalo, a little more toward the ultramarine, a little more toward the phthalo. But that looks pretty damn phthalo as well. I hope I'm not setting you wrong here. so this was important to get intense, right? And I'm not sure there's a huge difference in this color from what's going on up top. But I just know that at this point, I'm planning on doing all sorts of stuff to this color. Like I can neutralize it all sorts of ways. This actually ends up in the final painting. You can actually see some of that yellow coming through still in the final like work. But this ends up being just super intense. And like the intent was to get a very intense turquoise through here. All right, looks like there's going to be some last ditch. I mean, you can see there's more ultramarine here, and it looks like I'm going to punch up the ultramarine even more. You can see it's already kind of neutralizing the intense stuff there, but so I'm going to be using some impressionistic techniques with some like contemporary techniques with some like commercial art with some like very graphic heavy stuff and sometimes even like comic book. Like I'll draw right on top of, and that's why I like this, because I can get it basically as thick as I want with this paint and even the surface out in such a way that I can draw on top of it with a fine tip pen if I want, right? So that's the beauty of acrylic if you use it to its sort of potential. But what's going on here, you could essentially say it's like impressionistic, because this is just color. Like a lot of this is just like the color is next to other color, and if you have enough of like these kind of boundaries happening, I mean, there's some mixing that happened because that was new, but then some of this like that color mixing, that transitions entirely textural, right? And when I get into here with a lot of this, like you should see the texture, the gradient of color that comes out is just texture overlapping other texture. And so there's not even paint mixing. I mean, what did that dude's, I forgot his name. Anyway, I think it's Jensen. He's one of the YouTubers I've been watching, and he calls like direct painting. But anyway, there's some impressionistic direct stuff going on where like I don't want to mix it. I want like I want the color to start interplaying with like two intense colors to start interplaying, right? But when you scrape it off and you get like a textured interplay, like I didn't decide on every single stroke. It just sort of like happens with your high texture, right? So anyway, so we have ultramarine and a phthalo, right? And this is phthalo turquoise with mostly phthalo blue in it, right? So, and we have our umber here, our burnt umber and our buff. And I don't use this very much, even though I thought I might. That's why it's out. But just ignore the raw there, probably raw sienna. I've tinted it, right? So this isn't pure ultramarine. This isn't pure phthalo anything, right? I've tinted them, brought them out, and I've got a couple of like mass, like pools of color I can use here. Then I combine those, and then like I'm starting to build a kind of lineage for the blues of the sienna, and then start to build off of that too, right? So I moved the sienna over here, so that's just a pure sienna that's tinted. This is the pure tinted sienna with this sort of like midway point in between the two more pure blues, right? Phthalo blue with a little bit of phthalo grain, so it's like this phthalo turquoise, but toward the blue turquoise. Ultramarine, there's your halfway point. Then you move that toward the burnt sienna, and I'm taking that sienna into the yeah, there you go. Oof. Right, so we have another one. There's the burnt sienna closer to the phthalo. Get our Hansa yellow. And let's see what else we do. That was probably I don't know, raw umber probably. But that might be the burnt sienna with ultramarine blue, where I'm starting to get I use the ultramarine with the burnt sienna as the main complement in the next painting. Here, it's a little bit of a back player. I use the blues a lot more than the siennas. That's probably the umber. That's the sienna. So anyway, so I have those. I talk about it. The talking hand, well, is that actually talking? But anyway, I don't know how much of this I actually want to play through. I don't know how interesting it'll be. So any one of these can have more blue, more sienna, more whatever. So these darks are going to be skipping around that color space in the same way like the tints are skipping around that color space, okay? And then, of course you can get your midtones. They're going to be skipping around in that color space, same way. I mean, you can almost see that's more of a, this is more ultramarine here, and right here is more burnt sienna. Let's look at that. Oh, how I love paint. Just a slight fleck of the the ultramarine there, or yeah, that's more ultramarine than the phthalo. I mean, there might be a little bit of the phthalo in it, but man, that sure, boy, color does amazing stuff, doesn't it? So I don't mean to be oohing and awing my own painting. I love seeing color go down. And so I'm really cheering on paint properties actually rather than my own, ham-fisted work here. Yeah, I don't know how much to actually show you. I don't know how much of this you want to see, but man, you probably like to see paint move too. I guess I should, as this is going, maybe talk about how I approach this stuff. So when I say like ham-fisted, of course I'm talking about my palette knife skills, which are not where I want them to be for this painting so much, which is okay because I'm mostly just rendering texture with it. I'm literally using this knowing I'm going to be drawing over it, painting over it. Somehow I moved the whole damn thing there. But, I know I'm going to be drawing over it, painting over it, all that. You know what? I'll leave that for later. Yeah, this car isn't very... This car took a long time to build, and it ended up looking really cool. Like, you see this windshield. But with the way I recorded it, you don't see a lot of it. It's just so much glare here from the other angles. I'll save my diatribes about paint maybe later when I have some more time. This part of the painting is almost over. I'm just thinking I'm trying to introduce color with texture and some variation, right? Like I'm just leaving so much of this unmixed. I'm not mixing too much. If I mix something and lay it down, I'm trying to pick out this shape here that has it, the shape here, and the shape over here, so you'll see color instead of laying it down in one space and like finishing a rendering in some area. You'll see it right here, right? So I introduce the orange, I'm trying to build a color gradient through the spectrum here with a little bit of nuance and variation. I laid the orange down here, and then I laid it down here. After I laid yellow down here, and then here, right? And then I start taking that color around. So you build a color, you try to lay it down pretty evenly over the whole area you're working on, or the whole picture itself where you want to use that color. So you can build the entire painting at once. Okay. And you saw the blue laid down before, but I'm going to lay down now this yellow, the sort of warm colors right next to it. Yowzes, I love it. Look at that. Whoop. Love it. Like I said, I'm not trying to like cheer on my own painting here. Like, I just like seeing color in paint moving. So it was like, yeah, like that's it. Like right there, that spectrum through, like that's exactly how I wanted it to move, because that's how light works. And it's like great. There's some texture there. You have color. You have real paint. Like real visceral paint happening. There you go. That's what I'm trying to do. Now, whether or not I accomplish it is for other people to decide. For history, for critics, for buyers, for whomever, right? I mean, and if there's a mess up somewhere, like you can't really mess up at this point, because with the way this is being built, there's so many layers. If I need to adjust a color, like there's a million ways to adjust color as this goes on. And you'll see I do, because this whole thing gets so many glazes by the end, like impasto glazes, right? That any slight color adjustments are fine, right? What about shapes? Like shapes are a big deal, right? Well, you'll see how the shapes are refined, right? And so what you're doing is, it's almost like this, you're trying to get this sort of vibration going on. I talked about that with the sketch. Well, the same thing's going on here, just the larger scale. So I just obliterated a thing there. It probably just wasn't right. It was like the wrong spectrum. So it looks like I moved this spectrum over here and then just wiped that out and tried to push it back, kind of more like that. So it looks like I just real time, fixed some stuff. Because obviously I didn't want to keep it there. And it was, at this point, what you're doing is you're almost transcribing shapes, right? So I'm looking at shapes on some reference, and I'm laying the shape down here, but with the color flare and the sort of like movement and textural flare that the medium has, right? And so it looks like this was, the thing I put here should have gone here, so I wiped it out here and just sort of kept a lot of the color variation going, which is fine, right? So next layer, I'm gonna like impasto glaze this thing, and a lot of the peaks and valleys, because this is pretty thick, right? And a lot of those peaks and valleys actually come together, right? So you have shallower valleys and lower peaks, right? So you can then paint over top of that, and more delicate brushstrokes can actually compete with this heavy texture, right? And this is a technique that you can only kind of do with acrylic, okay? So we've got super high key, it's not that high key, but any of the shadows are going to have color, right? So it's a fairly intensely colored, it's maybe not as intense as some of these. Like you can tell how intense those get, but maybe. But the darker value still has color, and it looks like same thing. Like I'm just adjusting as we go. It's like, maybe that shouldn't have been there, and something else should have been. Let's see. Looks like that is over. Gosh, I just love the way that works. But you can see how much texture there is there, dude. Oh, come on. Yeah, so I laid it here, here, and here, and so I'm and over here. So I'm kind of like laying just another color down pretty evenly over that same space. Ooh, let's look at that. Let's cut in some negative shapes here, right? Because like look at how like jagged all those edges are, right? Come on, dude. So that's in the background. So that's a mountain. And I want to carry the color from this part of the background through here. So I just carved out that negative shape with the same color I have here. The whole point is that I want this to be associated with this, and then I change the color here for these because that's closer to sky, right? Or that is the sky, rather. Whereas this is mountain, technically, right? Now, how well defined that is, you can do whole paintings in this level of detail if you want, right? I sharpen it up and I think I get way more detail in there. But I want the color association for sure. And that kind of persists throughout. What am I laying down? It's hard to see. I don't record much from this angle because it's like obviously like your arms holding it, but I'll try to talk about the relevant details there. Yeah, so you throw some warm here on the, oh man. So it's just great. It's just sort of like beefing up this area, another level of interest. All like a lot of this texture gets like persists all the way through. Can't see what's happening over there. Where are we going? Right. Remember, that's a car. Okay, let's see what we're doing here. I'm trying to flesh out the architectural shapes here. No, I'm going to start painting. Anyway, so we'll stop there for this recording because I want the painting to be entirely its own section. So as this last part of painting right here, look at how much depth this is getting here. You can tell that like the depth here, the atmospheric depth is very different than what's going on here, which is great. And you can kind of see where like the pool of yellow is here, which is where the electric light is going to be, right? The artificial light. And then there's enough texture in the bottom and around here where you can start to understand that this is like pavement and all that. I'm trying not to cover up too much of the texture with these new strokes, but then, brushes have their own strengths, right? So we'll stop it here for now. Just a minute.